But remember, what are the big categories of personal injury? So if you go, what are the big categories of personal injury? When we talk about the sales presentation, this is after the campaign. So remember, you got the top 5 financial driver categories, and you should know at least one bullet point in every one of those categories. In other words, the diagnosis, you should know at least the main bullet point of the problem with that and how it's not being documented. So next is impairment. Next is loss of enjoyment of lifetime activities, duties under duress, and prognosis and need for future care. In other words, you should know without even looking at notes. I mean, obviously you should know the outline, the top 5 financial, and then you should know at least one bullet point of what the common problem is and how it hurts the attorney. So you could just talk off the cuff without having to look at notes. I mean, you should definitely know that if you're doing personal injury. And then same when you go to the next 5 categories, which is the 4 categories to defend the case. And then the 1 category of how to assemble the information. So the next 4 categories are, what's the major bullet point for how to document to defend against pre-existing injury? What's the main bullet point of how to document to defend against the low property damage injury? Same with subjective only. There's only subjective only evidence with soft tissue injuries argument. What's the one bullet point to point that out of what's typically not being done and how it's hurting the injury award. And then medicals, that's not medically accepted. Some diagnostics are not medically accepted. You should have at least one bullet point in that category also. And then the last one is the 12 steps to tell the story to support the injury award. You should know those 12. And because that's the basis of the narrative report. It's the basis of your trial deposition. So you should know those. Okay, so that's essentially the 10 categories. And then remember, in the presentation, we're just going through and pointing out all the things that are typically not being done and then adding them up when we get to the bottom. And, typically, remember, the average attorney is only getting 3 out of 10 of these categories documented. And all this is pointed out, and it's taken through step by step, small. And then we do the math. Remember, we give a case average, we give a credit of $1,000 per category, and then we will subtract that amount. So if they've only got 3 out of 10 categories documented with the doctors they're dealing with, so that's 7,000, 7 categories they did not. That's $7,000. Then we take that and we multiply that times the number of soft tissue injury cases they get a month. And then we take that number and multiply it over a year. That's when you start getting up to $200,000 and $300,000 of money lost by these attorneys not getting the proper documentation. So you should know the basics of that. This as simple as I just said it. What's the number 1 outline? What's the number 1 key point for each one of those topics that's not typically getting done? Okay, that's like bare bones stuff. Okay. Next is, you should be familiar with the 4 types of injury award offers based on Colossus, whether it's no offer, low ball offer, high value offer, or a policy limit award. You should just know that, and then kind of know which of those 10 categories on the left are essentially needed. Okay. And then the next category is the 4 types of potential injury awards based on the doctor's documentation. So you got the medicals, and then you should know how to calculate the medicals. Now this becomes real important, because now you're talking the attorney language, you're talking money. You're now crossing over from medical to legal is what's happening right here. This is where their interest really goes high. So you should know the basics of the medicals and how to calculate to support the injury award for medicals based on the science of 3 phases of healing, and your physiological therapeutics, and be able to tally all that up to show the injury award just from that to support the medicals injury award. Next is the impairment injury award. What's the formula for the impairment injury award? You should just know the basics of that formula of how to convert that particular patient's injury into the impairment injury award. Next is the pain and suffering. Same thing. You should have a basic understanding of the formula to convert that documentation into the patient's injury award. Remember, these are highly valuable. This is really high-end stuff you're talking about here, about how to talk to attorneys, and how to create motivation with attorneys, and how to create authority. In other words, how to create referrals. This is where it's all at. This is where it all culminates. All this documentation culminates in these categories. And then, so that's pain and suffering. And then same with prognosis and need for future care. Again, you should know the formula, how to convert that patient's into the prognosis and need for future care injury award. Okay. And then the next one. You should definitely know the 7 minimum categories that will stop lowball offers and create a high value injury award. There's 7 minimum categories of documentation that you want, that is needed, before you would say to yourself, yes, I'll go to court and testify for this patient because you've got a good case, or you've got a good case. And remember, you're the one that should be telling the attorney he has a good case, because they don't know medicals. And remember, that's what will happen when you do the offer and you do show them all the things that are being documented. And then you show them everything, that's all the categories of how it is documented, whether it's positive or negative isn't relative. What's important is that they know that you know all the categories. So whoever they do refer to you, they know that you know how to document all the categories, whether that patient has them or not. That's the single most important concept to get across from me to you as clients, or for you to the attorney. That's what creates authority with the attorney. And then, so you got the 7 minimum categories. So you should know what those are, those 7 minimum categories, and the difference between primary and secondary information, primary and secondary diagnostics, as it relates to MMI, because all of this doesn't really matter much unless the patient goes to MMI. Okay. So there you are. That's the big picture. Those are the categories. That's the big picture of personal injury. And of course, when you know how to do that, you create a tremendous amount of business, because you're obviously seen as the authority. You know what is and isn't being documented, and you know how to interpret it. And then, of course, once you add to that how to do the 25 steps of how to do a deposition or a trial testimony, you're off the chart.